Hi, and welcome to ShadowTalk's weekly intelligence summary track, where our team of analysts dive into the top threat intelligence stories each week. To read their full findings and analysis, make sure to visit resources.digitalshadows.com. Now here's your host, Harrison Van Riper.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of ShadowTalk, your threat intelligence weekly podcast. With me this week is Christian Rankin here in the Dallas office. Christian, how are you doing today?
Doing well, Harrison. Good to be back on another episode. It's been too long. I know it's been far too long. I've been dying to hear my voice. So far too long.
And then also joining me on the line is Alex Girikou, who's also in Dallas but not in the office. So, Alex, we're very disappointed not to see you today.
Yeah, it's good to be back. It's only been a week for me, but unfortunately I have to stay at home today because I'm playing nurse because poor old Zuko had to get neutered yesterday. So, watching out for him today.
It's a good pet owner status.
Zuko is Alex's brother.
Yeah.
Zuko is Alex's brother, yes. Okay. Yeah, no, definitely not his dog.
It's actually my dad.
All right, so let's kick it off this week. Christian, you're going to give us a breakdown of the main story, and this one has to do with Lazarus Group, so let's dig right into it.
Lazarus Group's always fun to talk about. This week on May 9th, the U.S. CERT issued an advisory for the ElectricFish malware, which the team attributed to the Lazarus Group. So one malicious 32-bit executable file was reportedly identified in the wild and is capable of targeting Windows devices, but whether or not this has been actively deployed in an attack is unknown. ElectricFish is a command line utility tool designed to funnel traffic between two IP addresses. It attempts to establish a TCP session using a custom protocol between a source and a destination IP address. The configuration of ElectricFish allows the user to designate a destination IP address and port controlled by the attacker, and a source IP address and port within the target network, along with a proxy IP address and port. So connection to the proxy server is authenticated with a username and password combination, and the attacker can then bypass the target's authentication mechanism to directly connect with their controlled infrastructure. So this funneling technique is often used for legitimate business, such as by financial service organizations and cloud access service brokers. But on this occasion, it facilitates the malicious exfiltration of stolen information and helps the attacker to avoid detection. Reverse engineering of the executable file confirmed that ElectricFish continuously sought to connect to both the source and the destination systems to connect to a system sitting within a proxy server. This allows Lazarus to bypass the compromised system's required authentication procedures to reach outside the network. So ElectricFish is not the only custom malware variant attributed to Lazarus that has a proxy-related function. So there's others such as Bankshot, which is a remote access Trojan. There's Fall Chill, which is another remote access Trojan. And then there's Bad Call. Bad Call is a Trojan that functions as a proxy server between the victim and the C2 and is capable of conducting recon and modifying the firewall key in the Windows registry.
I gotta say that Lazarus Group is some of the coolest sounding malware variants. So props to whoever names those.
Yeah, I don't think it's them, but
I think those are from U.S. CERT. I think.
Yeah,
I think
so.
Yeah.
But U.S. CERT also doesn't call them Lazarus. I think it's like Hidden
Cobra. They call them Hidden Cobra. Yeah.
So that's even cooler. Yeah. What does this all mean? Proxy servers are computer systems or applications that serve as a go-between between a computer to a target server. So they offer varying levels of security and privacy and are a focal point of numerous cyber attacks. Botnet developers have previously targeted proxy servers, as have cyber criminals distributing banking Trojans. The threat posed by ElectricFish is its ability to negate security procedures by establishing a session between the targeted system and the attacker's C2 server. In this way, it effectively bypasses the firewall and web filter used by the proxy server. Lazarus Group has demonstrated a mixture of financial and political motives in their confirmed attacks to date. However, attribution of previous attacks to Lazarus Group has not always been accurate, shall we say, though there are thought to be at least two spin-off groups, one called Blunarov and another called Andariel. I'm not positive
I
how to
usually say
pronounce that.
Andariel, but yeah, I don't know either.
Yeah, there's a couple where I just kind of let it out and see what happens.
Just reminds me of Lord of the Rings, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, those two, Blunaroff and let's say Andariel, they certainly share TTPs and tools with the Lazarus Group. And then there's the suspected North Korean group APT-38, which has recently been blamed for attacks previously attributed to Lazarus. The confusion over attribution and responsibility is often owing to the group's overlaps in targeted sectors and objectives and similarities in their TTPs and malware. This indicates a network of threat groups likely sharing operational and development resources under the direction of the North Korean state. So the U.S. CERT did not clarify why ElectricFish was attributed to Lazarus Group, but even if the malware is not directly associated with that collective, it can almost certainly be linked to one or more of the other North Korean groups operating in the same landscape. So going forward, this is the second US CERT alert issued in the past 2 months for custom malware attributed to Lazarus Group. Our listeners will remember in episode 15, we talked about the new Trojan Hoplite, which is capable of installing backdoors on devices and collecting information regarding compromised systems. Although there is no confirmation that ElectricFish has been deployed in a cyber attack to date, its detection confirms that Lazarus Group is developing new malware and tools to facilitate its campaigns. ElectricFish's ability to exfiltrate information while avoid detection would be useful for a financially motivated or politically motivated attack. Distribution of the malware would likely be via a phishing attack, potentially downloaded as a secondary payload following successful infection by one of Lazarus Group's backdoor or rat variants. The group is almost certain to continue to develop its existing toolset as well as new malware variants over the long-term future. So, despite having only identified one sample of ElectricFish to date, US CERT quickly released a malware analysis report. This kind of report details malware and campaigns attributed to North Korean threat actors, and its purpose is to enable defensive measures, but also likely to openly attribute aggressive and malicious cyber activity to a country with which the United States has strained relations, shall we put it lightly. US CERT will likely continue this practice of releasing new alerts upon detection of newly attributable North Korean cyber activity for the long term. However, I think we all know that such alerts are unlikely to deter or discourage North Korean threat groups from conducting more attacks.
Yeah.
To put lightly again.
Probably not.
Yeah.
It's probably going to keep going.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Well, yeah, that was very comprehensive. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to do so.
Yeah, I think that kind of covers all the questions that may have come up out of that. If you want to read the full Intel summary for this week, then go to resources.digitalshadows.com and you can see everything that we just talked about. All right, so let's move on to the highlights for this week. So, Alex, there was a WhatsApp vulnerability that everybody was freaking out about. What was that?
So Facebook hasn't had enough bad publicity over the last couple of months. There was a vulnerability in the Messenger WhatsApp. So it was used to deliver spyware, likely towards a human rights lawyer and a Saudi dissident. They've been confirmed as having been targeted. And what's interesting about this is that it was allegedly developed by the Israeli company NSO Group. And so we've seen previous incidents where this spyware has been used outside of, legitimate capacities. It's not quite sure who was responsible for this, but in any case, it was likely done for espionage or surveillance purpose rather than for cybercrime or hacktivism.
Yeah, and we've seen NSO Group come up a lot with that kind of spyware stuff in the past.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see kind of the continued sale of spyware almost publicly now.
Mm-hmm.
Just being sold amongst.
It's so well tracked, it seems like, lately.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it wasn't this vulnerability. It was used in quite a targeted way. I think you had to call the recipient to gain access to their to the details. Is that right, Alex?
For sure, yeah. You'd have to call the user via the voice over IP function of WhatsApp, and so it's definitely targeted. This is not something that's a widespread campaign affecting the millions of WhatsApp users across the globe. And details of the call can be wiped from the device's record. So if the threat actor had called you, they would, in theory, be able to remove any record of that actually having occurred. So typical spyware activity, trying to collect information without the user knowing.
Interesting. All right. Then moving on to the second story for this week. So there was a threat actor online, FXMSP, that was claiming that they had hacked 3 different antivirus companies this week. And so that also made a lot of people freak out. So Christian, what was that about?
Unfortunately, we don't have another great hidden Cobra type name here. It's just FXMSP. So yeah, on May 9th, it was reported that the FXMSP was offering access to the network and source code of at least 3 United States-based antivirus companies. The group is currently advertising $250,000 for access to the network and $150,000 for the source code, but appears to be willing to reduce the price to sell as a combination, depending on the inquired antivirus company. So for our listeners who have $250,000 that they're wondering to do with, there's an option. So at the point of the original sale, we didn't know which companies were affected. However, as time has gone by, we've had an idea of not all of them, but some of them. So to validate the claim, FXMSP provided screenshots of the listing, claiming up to 30 terabytes of data were taken from the breach networks. The screenshots showed information of the company's development documentation, artificial intelligence model, web security software, and antivirus software base code. So FXMSP reportedly compromised the Active Directory of at least one of the companies affected and established persistence through a RDP server. Active Directory is a critical component of the Windows network responsible for authenticating and authorizing all users and computers on the network. So this same tactic has also been used by the Carbonate Group in financially motivated attacks against banks worldwide, but there's no true indication right now of the collaboration between the 2 threat actors. I've just noticed that link being thrown around. FXMSP also reportedly developed a botnet specifically designed to steal credentials, which they claim has facilitated additional attacks and intrusions.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's a big thing to claim that you've breached 3 antivirus companies and just openly offering it for sale online.
Well, it's interesting too because they announced that they were going to attempt to do that before, and then here they come out with the information. Yeah,
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so FXMSP has actually previously provided what's actually turned out to be legitimate accesses. So based on that, it's likely that this kind of information is legitimate.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting. All right. Well, yeah, definitely something to keep an eye on, and we'll just keep tracking it. All right. So then moving on to the final story from this week. There was some malware that was found within cloud service updates after a man-in-the-middle attack. What's up with this?
So there's a malware called Plead, and it was found to be hiding within a legitimate software update for Asus Web Storage, which is a cloud storage service. It was enabled via man-in-the-middle attack, and we've seen these kinds of hijacked updates in the past before. It can be a great way of reaching a large quantity of users of those services. I remember a couple of months ago, there was the hypothetical attack that someone could do against the Fortnite launcher. So if someone hijacks that legitimate software update, implants some malware, they could possibly reach a lot of people. And so Plead, this malware variant in specific, is mainly an information theft malware, and it also has backdoor functionality. So it's been previously associated with the black tech cyber espionage group, and they're primarily active in Asia, and in the past they've targeted Taiwanese organizations. So it's likely that similar organizations could have been targeted by this.
All right, yeah, definitely interesting. And Asus is not having a good time these past couple of months. A lot of compromises in their updates and supply chains and whatnots.
Yeah, it's taking the negative publicity off of Facebook a little bit here.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so then that will wrap it up for this week. Remember to go download the full intelligence summary at resources.digitalshadows.com. Go, you know what you should also do is go follow Photon Research on Twitter. It's at photon_research. We just actually were featured in a Cyberscoop article by our good journalist friend, Jeff Stone. He recently wrote up about the exploit forum and how it's continued on in this time of ongoing law enforcement actions against a lot of dark websites and criminal marketplaces. So go give it a read, and it's some cool research that we got a chance to work on with Jeff. All right, so then the question of the week. Drum roll. Okay, question of the week this week. So Christian, you and I both really like this show called Billions. Alex, I don't know if you've ever seen it. I don't think you have, actually.
No, I have not. I've only heard you and Christian talk about it.
Okay, well, this isn't a question about Billions, but...
Great, because I'd be horrible.
Yeah. If you had $1 billion, what would you buy?
Oh, if I had $1 billion...
Christian's about to say cryptocurrency, isn't he? Bitcoin.
No.
He's going to buy all of Bitcoin.
Absolutely not. Okay, so if I had $1 billion, I think one thing that it's kind of my dream to retire and have, so I would just speed this up. I would buy property in Botswana, and I'd have my own personal airstrip, and I would get like a little biplane and get my pilot's license and fly around Africa.
Fly around? That'd be pretty cool, actually.
Yeah.
Would you let me fly in the back seat?
No, I just drag you through the air.
Oh,
Be
okay.
on a rope, yeah.
That'd be kind of cool too.
Yeah.
Like paragliding.
Sure, yeah.
Would I have like a?
You can call it whatever you want. I'm not saying
it's
you
you
like
dragging me behind a plane.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, that sounds great. I love that idea. But that's probably not a full $1 billion. Or is it? Is property in Botswana expensive?
Yeah, no, I'd still have a lot of money left over.
All right, that's fair.
Yeah.
At least it's
I mean,
something.
I would definitely give the majority of it away.
I was thinking like you might open like a nature preserve.
No, I think I would, in terms of like philanthropic ways to spend that money, I would direct it towards climate change.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Alex, what's yours?
So I might be able to put down a down payment on a 1-bedroom apartment in San Francisco.
That's pretty good. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. Just the down payment, though. I mean,
Yeah.
you're not going to be able to afford much more.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean,
Oh, was that Zuko?
yeah. So, but honestly, I don't know if the technology is there yet right now. But if we're thinking a couple of years in the future, $1 billion could probably buy you a trip to the moon or a trip to space, right? And I feel like that's the kind of once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that you should not pass up on.
I bet it won't cost $1 billion.
Oh no, the Virgin Galactic is saying that they expect the trips to cost $800,000.
Okay, a couple of
that's
round
more
trips then,
reasonable.
yeah, for me and my best
Yeah.
friend. If we're putting the
Yeah.
philanthropic side of things out, because in that case, then yeah, of course I would work that towards the environment, I think.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. That's good for both of you for being philanthropists with your billions of dollars. I'm just gonna burn it. I'm just gonna burn it all.
Just Pablo Escobar that.
Yeah, I'm gonna be like the Joker. Just want to watch the world burn.
Okay.
What would I do with my $1 billion? You know what I would do? I would buy Digital Shadows a new Dallas office, just outright, and it would be the coolest office ever.
That only you can work in.
Only me. Everybody else has to work from home. Actually, you know what it would be? It would be up in the big ball downtown.
Mhm.
That's where it would be.
Oh, cool. That'd be fun.
Yeah. And I can just watch everything.
Other people call it the Reunion Tower. but-
Yeah, whatever that is.
Yeah.
I'm from Dallas. I've lived here my entire life, and yet I completely forget things all the time. Welcome back to Shadow Talk. Joining me now are two members of Digital Shadow's security engineering team, Dr. Richard Gold and Simon Hall. How's it going today, guys?
Not too bad, thanks.
So Rich, you and Simon are both based in London, obviously. I am not. But you said that you were both having kind of a really interesting conversation about password expiration and some of the guidance kind of around that. And you sent me the link that sparked your discussion. And so I was having a read through it. And, I kind of got my own opinions on it, but I'm assuming that you both do as well.
So let's jump into it. I guess let me give some background to the listeners first. So there's one specific kind of guidance that we're talking about, which is this idea that IT administrators should force users to reset their passwords on some sort of schedule. So like every 90 days or something like that. The NCSC in the UK appears to have kind of gone against that, I guess, back in 2015, which I actually wasn't aware of until you sent me that. So that's kind of what we're talking about. And I'll let y'all kind of dig into it.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. I remember when it first came out, it was very controversial. So basically, the NCSC argued against scheduled password resets. They mention in the guidance that, obviously, if there's evidence of compromise, you need to reset the passwords. And their justification for this was that people find it very hard to remember lots of different passwords. So what happens is they tend to settle on a scheme, and those schemes are easily predictable by attackers. And just to provide a little bit of context there, what we mean by that usually is they're talking about password cracking. That means that an attacker has got access to a whole bunch of hashes, and they're using something like John the Ripper or Hashcat, some like GPU cluster or whatever, to crack the passwords, to recover the plain text of the passwords from the hashes. So that's the general attack that we're talking about here. So the NCSC, which is also worth reminding people is part of GCHQ, so they're the defensive arm, or maybe even more the civilian arm, but they're drawing on that offensive expertise from the GCHQ side. So their comment is about the predictability that comes by forcing people to regularly change their passwords, and thereby inadvertently forcing them to use a scheme, unless you use a password manager, which is something else we can talk about. That predictability ends up providing more value to the attackers than the threat, which is, for example, the password being discovered later on, and then being reused, at some point in the future. So that's kind of, in broad strokes, what the guidance was. And as I say, it generated quite a lot of controversy at the time, went very much against the grain. And so me and Simon were talking about this the other day, and I think Simon has some really interesting points. So actually some pretty critical nuance around that guidance. And of course, because we're mates, we like to sort of gently tease each other about this kind of thing. But I think he's got some really good points. And but that being said, at the end of the day, I think it is very, very solid guidance. Now, what exactly you should be doing is very much up to your organization, your threat models, your services, and etc. that you're using. But maybe we can jump straight into like what Simon thought the guidance didn't cover.
Yeah. So, I mean, you say kind of debate. I think the word you used was deathmatch, which is fair enough.
I will definitely contend that you did say deathmatch. I have the Slack messages to prove it.
So yeah, it's an interesting one. So I've got my fairly strong opinions about this, and it's not, I'm saying it's incorrect guidance, but I think when it comes down to policies, there's no policy that fits all organizations or individuals, right? So you can't have one policy and say everybody should use this guidance or this policy because it's the must, right? So everyone's going to have their own kind of criteria. And when it comes down to password expirations, there's a lot of factors that come into this for me, especially like length of time. So if you've got a password that never expires for an individual unless there's signs of compromise, which then is not always a sign of a compromise when it happens. So if you have a user that's in your organization for 2-3 years or even 1 year plus, and they've had the same password since joining, there's a lot of kind of factors into how that password's going to be generated initially. Day one they join, administrator sits down with them and asks them to generate a 16-character password, complexity, whatever. They've now got that pressure to generate this password. If they use something similar to what they've used previously through personal experience, then that password could already be compromised. Right? It could already be exposed if they've used it for the same password for their personal accounts, but it matches the criteria that the organization's asking. So there's that chance there. There's also the fact that, anything over 1 year plus, if that password is being reused if that password's being used within the organization over that period of time, there's a lot of ways that an attacker can gain access to passwords. We've got malware, credential harvesters, we've got phishing campaigns, and these campaigns are getting a lot more sophisticated, so they're not always being detected within organizations. So you've now got potential of these passwords actually getting out there. And especially if we move to cloud services or public services, like what used to be an internal Active Directory password that they would need to gain access to your organization to actually use, is now potentially a public password as well. So if someone's using Outlook 365, which so many organizations are these days, that password could then be used to access someone's email accounts online. And then there's kind of the whole 2FA, MFA kind of single sign-on factors for those. But services like Outlook 365 have bypasses for those. So the problem is there are a lot of kind of things against it. And I think if an organization knows what they're doing, they've got a lot of factors in place for, like, they've got multi-factor authentication everywhere they possibly can. They're using kind of U2F tokens to kind of get around some of the phishing attacks, and they're being extra cautious, then that's fine. I'm happy with that. But giving this advice to an immature organization who doesn't really have a mature security posture, and they're saying, okay, you don't need to reset any of your passwords, and kind of 2 years later, all of these passwords for their employees are now floating around in breach data or kind of on Pastebin or wherever else, and there's now a whole list of passwords and usernames that can gain access to someone's organization, and they may not be aware of that. So it's not the case of, yes, if you're compromised, reset a password. So yeah, I think for me, there's a lot of things against it, but my preference would be to kind of suggest a compromise where passwords are reset biannually or annually to kind of get around some of this kind of stale password exposure.
Yeah, I mean, there could be. I think you make a good argument there. So, I mean, joking aside, I think it's a really solid set of things you're talking about, and I think that compromise is maybe reasonable. I think that's something that would on one of my favorite podcasts, Risky Business, Adam Boileau there was talking about how in the data that he's collected from like the domain controllers and stuff that he's popped over the years, the amount of entropy in the password decreases with how frequently it's changed or how frequent the password changes happen. And that's another sort of really interesting point. I mean, I'm guessing as well that there's data behind the NCSE GCHQ decision, which is probably not going to be shared with us, but at least, and that data that Adam Boileau has is not going to make it to the public either, most likely. But if we take it at face value, I think there's good reason to believe that there is that risk is real from having that
Sure.
that frequently password resets. Although, as you say, maybe there is that sweet spot, and I think as well. As you mentioned, there are now other things you can do, for example, like the UTF tokens, or even, I see that like Windows Hello is going to be like a FIDO UTF authenticator in the next release. So I think there is a push towards better controls around authentication. But I think what I liked specifically with this guidance as well was, now we're actually having this discussion. Now we're actually, rather than just going, oh yes, it should be every 30 days blanket, that's it, one size fits all. Now we are thinking about it, and I like as well that we're talking about the common attacker techniques, their approaches, credential stuffing, password cracking, that kind of stuff. And we're talking about these things, and we're talking about how they impact the choices that you want to make around how you protect credentials. And then one of the things that we were touching on before was, what are those credentials used for? Now, in some organizations, you may be fortunate enough to say, it's an Active Directory password is never put in over the network.
Right.
Only done inside of your corporate domain. And then, of course, if you think about zero trust stuff, that's, okay, it's going to be protected by two-factor, but it's still, it's a kind of a different thing. But then if you're a sort of organization that you have like huge amounts of RDP, remote desktop stuff that you need to handle, then it becomes sort of slightly different than how you do brute forcing. Do you have brute force lockout policies, mitigation price? And then it just, kind of unravels at that point. So,
and I think this is the key thing is there's just not a one-size-fits-all policy, and people have to kind of look at their own organization and have some common sense to say, well, this policy recommends this, but what is the compromise? What are the factors that we have to take into consideration regarding how we currently have our setup? And as you say, and I think the big thing that here is kind of where passwords, as you say, used to be on your own network only in your trusted environment. Now these credentials are now being used across kind of public services or cloud services. So you've got a lot more risk of kind of phishing and credential compromise. But B, that any credentials that are out there could easily be used to kind of replay against those services. So, and corporate kind of credentials are being used everywhere. Active Directory can be integrated into a lot of things. So. Or if someone's using kind of single sign-on, for instance, they're kind of protected against any kind of 2FA or whatever else they're using on there. But there's still a lot of opportunity for a password that's, let's say, a year or older to be out there and become public knowledge and be used in credential stuff and attacks, as you say. So I think there's a lot of risk there, but people just depending on your deployments, and people have to kind of take that into consideration.
What do you think about those kind of lists of known passwords that you can integrate into your environment, and then if somebody tries to do like password 1 with a capital P, it gets blacklisted, and you're not allowed to change your password to that? Do you think those are kind of helpful?
It's a really interesting thing, and I do really like this because Azure AD does this, right? So they take these and they generate a blacklist for the passwords, but that depends on kind of the passwords being crackable or where they've come from, and for them to actually become public knowledge. This is one of the other things, right? So it really depends, because there's a lot of actors out there. When you start getting into the more advanced groups, and they're actually got these lists, they collect them. They've done kind of their APT style stuff where they're just collecting intel over a period of time. So the block lists definitely help with this sort of stuff, but they're mainly blocking kind of commonly used passwords, I guess, or crackable passwords.
Well, definitely the sort of like kind of like the rock you, the kind of really the obvious stuff. But I mean, I think that's kind of fine. I mean, again, if you know the limitations, but just being able to have that kind of enforcing that basic level of hygiene. So like the things, I would also like to have things like name of organization and the year, or name of organization and the season. There should be some like common, schemes should definitely be blacklisted, but I haven't seen that yet.
And if there's an Olympics going on, you're not allowed to use that.
Sports teams as well, World Cup, like
anything like that kind of stuff. I was just going to say, I wanted to kind of go back to the password manager kind of aspect of it, because this guidance kind of assumes that it's all going to be structured, right? It's all going to be provided from the user, but they're going to be the ones creating the password. What if they have a password manager that generates that password for them? Where does that come into the talk?
Well, I think that's a really good place to start when we're talking about like how much entropy you generate for your password. Now, I mean, I think that for something that you're going to be typing in a lot, like an Active Directory password, if you're, then you want it to be something which you can type with reasonable ease. So that's why we often encourage like passphrases. So, entire like clumps of words, groups of words together. That's pretty easier to type because it comes a little bit more naturally than, the sort of, if you look at the sort of password that a password manager generates, the kind of random string of characters, it's kind of difficult to keep in your head. That's the thing. All of this stuff is based upon human behavior, how we're built, how we're structured, how we're wired, that we are very predictable. We are very, very bad at randomness, and we're very, very good at thinking we're good at randomness and thinking we're unpredictable, and we are all hopeless at it. So that's why password managers are great. So for like cloud services and stuff like that, where you can easily have some kind of integration, that password manager is fantastic. But for something that you have to use, like to keep in your head, like a 24 character string with random characters, it's going to just cause you a lot of pain. But a passphrase, something long with some special characters and everything in there, but that's kind of special for you, something which is not so common. That's, I think, a better way to go. Simon, what do you think?
Yeah, and I think I'm a big fan of password managers, and I know some people are not so much in the industry, but it's one of those things. I think the use of a password manager is really helpful in a way that people, if they're having a password that doesn't expire ever, or unless they're compromised, having a password manager there will give them the ability to kind of generate these secure passwords without then having to go, actually, I've got this password I've had for a year. I might just reuse that same password on my kind of, my personal accounts or on all of the other services I'm using for my organization. The fact that there's a password manager, not necessarily for your Active Directory account, but there's a password manager there so they can generate passwords for all of their other services, it's a big deal. Because if they're having to generate these really complex, as Rich said, passwords, then there's got to be some kind of compromise, something there for them to be able to assist them without them reusing passwords. Because this is my concern with the whole advice of password expiration is that risk of getting back into that password reuse phase that we've managed to get so many people out of now. We've educated so many people to say, right, password reuse is bad. But then you're getting to the point of saying, well, the password's never going to expire. So that's also, in my opinion, it kind of going to lead back to some of that laziness where people are going to start going, okay, I'm just going to reuse this strong password I've just generated. 16 characters, got lots of special characters, 16 characters and lots of special characters. It'd be fine, on my personal mail as well. But with a password manager there, they then, and with a bit of assistance from an organization or whoever else, hopefully us, to kind of say, well, you've got a password manager there, you can now generate these non-expiring or annually expiring passwords for all of these other accounts. So I think they're definitely going to help. And this is the thing with security, right? There's not one solution that's going to do everything. It's having multiple steps and multiple layers of defense things to help people. And we do have to help our users, whether that's through security awareness or whether that's through providing them with additional solutions to help them with their jobs and even their personal accounts.
Definitely. I mean, we certainly, threat actors will go after the personal accounts. We've seen plenty of cases where that's happened. And I think, just on the password manager thing, I've seen lots of cases where people have made bad password choices and gotten owned. I don't remember seeing cases where the password managers were the cause of the ownage. And of course, there was a case, LastPass had a security incident that was very public and it made a lot of people nervous. But if you take, I like to think about these things like a public health kind of view, in terms of like getting rid of a lot of the low-level issues. Sure, if you're a high-value target for Chinese espionage, okay, maybe a cloud-based password manager is a problem. But for the vast majority of people, I think it's just makes sense.
All right, well, that will do it for us for this week. Thank you, guests. Thank you, listeners. Thank you, Dallas and Reunion Tower. We will talk to y'all next week.